I'm Logan, 35, a hospital operations manager in Tennessee. At my own graduation, my father stood first and said into the mic, "You're celebrating a failure." All I'd built, night shifts, tuition, dignity, collapsed in one sentence. But as the dean stepped forward, the lights above the stage caught something I hadn't expected. Stillness. If this stirs something in you, tell me. Where are you listening from tonight? I was still wearing my scrubs when the email came through. The kind that sticks to your back after a 12-hour shift, no matter how many times you lean against the break room wall. I was standing outside the emergency entrance, air thick with late spring humidity and the faint buzz of distant traffic, when my phone vibrated once, then again. The subject line blinked across the cracked screen. "Congratulations, student speaker selection." For a moment, I just stood there, watching the message without opening it. The smell of bleach was still on my hands. Somewhere behind me, the soft whine of an ambulance faded. I knew what the email meant, and I knew exactly what it didn't. I drove home with the windows cracked just enough to make the wind feel like motion. My apartment, like my life, was clean but cramped. I lived alone, except for the occasional shift overlap with Emily when she'd crash on my couch after back-to-back doubles. She wasn't there this morning. Just the silence of a worn-out fan and the low hum of my refrigerator. I clicked the coffee maker to life, the drip echoing in the quiet. And then, because part of me still hoped someone might care, I forwarded the email to my mother. Her reply came exactly 4 minutes later. Commencement. At that place. That place. As if Westmore Business School were a convenience store off the highway and not the institution that had kept me up every night studying after work, while my classmates interned with polished firms arranged by uncles and fraternity connections. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. There wasn't a version of the truth that would matter to her. Instead, I drove over. The Mercer house sits on a quiet street in Sequoia Hills. Classic white-columned, red-bricked Southern tradition. Unchanged since I was a teenager sneaking out after curfew. The lawn looked exactly the same, trimmed to perfection, bushes squared off like someone would measure them if they weren't right. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of lemon polish. My mother sat at the kitchen island reading Southern Living, her coffee in a porcelain cup I wasn't allowed to touch as a kid. I cleared my throat. She looked up, one brow already raised. "Did you bring laundry?" I shook my head. "I'm speaking at commencement. They selected me." She blinked, tilted her head slightly. "Commencement? At that place?" I nodded. She sipped her coffee. "Tanner's ceremony is the next day. You'll be attending that, I assume." I let the silence answer for me. My father was in the study. I could see him through the open double doors, surrounded by mahogany and certificates. I walked to the doorway, leaned in just enough. "Dad?" I said. He didn't look up from his paper. "Tanner's ceremony is Friday. Dress properly. Navy suit." That's not why I came. Still no eye contact. Just a rustle of the page as he flipped to the financial section. I stood there for a moment longer. I don't know what I expected. Acknowledgement, maybe. The bare minimum of interest. But I didn't get it. I turned and walked to the kitchen, where the family calendar hung on the fridge. I used to write my soccer games on it in blue marker, only for them to be erased and replaced with Tanner's debate schedule. That hadn't changed either. I scanned the month. Tanner's event was circled in red ink, block letters. Duke Med Commencement. Mine wasn't there. I stared at the empty square, then quietly pulled out my phone and opened the email again, just to remind myself it was real. That afternoon, I went back to my place, back to the couch with the sinking cushion, and forwarded the message to Emily. No explanation, no preface. Her reply came instantly. "You have to do this." There wasn't a moment of hesitation in her words, just belief. That simple, frustrating, humbling belief she always had in me, even when I didn't. I lay back, resting my head against the frayed edge of the throw pillow I hadn't washed in weeks. I stared at the ceiling. I thought about everything I'd scrubbed: hallways, trauma rooms, floors still sticky from night emergencies. And whether all that effort mattered if no one in your own bloodline ever saw past the stain on your collar. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Uncle Russell's assistant, an invitation to the graduation Sunday picnic at his estate. Dress code, light colors, lawn formal. There would be speeches, photos, and, of course, plenty of talk about Tanner's future in medicine. No mention of me. I looked across the room at the fridge. Mine didn't have a calendar, just a grocery list scribbled in Sharpie and a magnet from the hospital gift shop that said, "Scrub in, show up." It wasn't legacy, but it was mine. And for now, that was enough. I showed up wearing my one clean button-down. The collar was slightly curled, no matter how many times I'd tried to press it flat. Everyone else at the Mercer picnic wore pastels and heirloom watches, clothes that looked like they'd never known a wrinkle or a rack on clearance. The backyard at Uncle Russell's estate had that magazine-perfect feel. Patio furniture with matching cushions, tea glasses sweating gently in the sun, and peach cobbler that probably hadn't been touched by the person who claimed to have made it. The string quartet played something vaguely classical in the shade of a white tent. It all looked rehearsed, controlled, like the kind of party where even the breeze had a schedule. Tanner was at the center of it, naturally. Duke blue sport coat, Ray-Bans, laughing the way you do when you're used to being admired. My cousin Jenna clung to his elbow like a prize, even though they were related, and that fact didn't seem to make her admiration any less theatrical. No one noticed me arrive. Or if they did, no one said so. I walked past the tables, past the ice buckets and cut lemons, and picked up a paper plate. The coleslaw was warm. The potato salad looked suspiciously like it came from a plastic tub. I took a spoonful anyway, and moved to the edge of the yard, just far enough to not be in the photos, but close enough to hear what was said. "Let's raise a glass," Uncle Russell announced, lifting his champagne flute. He stood beside Tanner, one arm slung around his shoulder like a proud owner showing off a prize bull. To the future Dr. Mercer, top of his class, destined for great things. The best of us. Everyone cheered. Glasses clinked. Someone behind me chuckled and said, "And Logan's still mopping up trauma rooms, right?" It wasn't cruel. Not exactly. It was the kind of comment people think is harmless when they say it with a smile and a second mimosa in hand. I didn't turn around. I just let the words settle. Same way I'd let disinfectant settle over a floor, slow, stinging. My father, standing by the pergola with a glass of bourbon, added his own punchline. "Let's just say one of them makes the family proud." That one stung more than the coleslaw sliding down my throat. He didn't say it loud, didn't need to. The delivery was sharp, practiced, like a lawyer finding just the word that couldn't be argued with. I stood there, paper plate in hand, watching Tanner nod humbly as if the praise embarrassed him. It didn't. He wore admiration like a second skin. at my cup. Still on the table, still full. No one had toasted me. No one ever had. It sat there, glass sweating in the heat, untouched. Funny how invisible you can be in the middle of your own family. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I stepped away from the crowd, past the manicured rose bushes and the stone path I used to run down barefoot as a kid. I pulled it out and saw Emily's name. They don't know you, but they will. No punctuation, no overstatement, just quiet conviction. I stared at her message for a long time, the words blurring slightly with the light bouncing off the screen. I didn't reply. Not yet. I walked back to the edge of the gathering, to the place where I could still see them clinking glasses and laughing. Where my name wasn't called. But my absence was noted just enough to become a joke. Tanner caught my eye from across the lawn. He gave a small nod. I returned it. We weren't rivals. We weren't close. We were two people raised in the same house with completely different rules. Later, as I was placing my empty plate in the bin and avoiding another lecture about networking, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was from the university. Confirmed, student speaker, Logan Mercer. Please send draft by Monday. I stared at the message. It looked real in a way the rest of this day didn't. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked toward the table where the champagne had been passed around. My glass still sat there, untouched, but still standing. The buffer machine let out a low, steady hum that filled the silence better than music ever could. I moved it slowly down the hallway, letting the vibration travel up through my wrists, up my forearms, until it settled like a second pulse in my chest. The fluorescent lights above buzzed in rhythm, catching the streak of polish behind me. This was my last hour on shift, and the hall was empty. At this time of morning, somewhere between too late and not yet early, emergencies slowed down, and everything settled into a kind of quiet only night workers understand. I let the buffer hum while I rehearsed the first line in my head again. Some people inherit a legacy. It didn't sound right yet. I knew what I wanted to say, but the words felt like they were still in the walls somewhere, waiting for the right time to echo back. Behind me, a familiar scent broke through the bleach and floor wax. Coffee with too much cinnamon. I turned to find Emily walking toward me in her own half-button scrubs, holding out a paper cup like an offering. "You're not supposed to drink this close to the OR doors," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "And you're not supposed to be writing commencement speeches while buffing the trauma wing." Fair. I took the coffee. She leaned against the wall and watched me run the machine for a minute before she asked, "You really going to talk about this place in the speech?" I hesitated. I scrubbed this floor more times than I've been called by my full name at home. Feels like it earned a mention. She smiled. Not a big one. Just the kind that curled up at the edges. "You know your family's going to hate that." "I'm not writing it for them." She let the silence settle. She was good at that. Emily didn't fill space just because it was there. Maybe that's why I kept letting her into mine. I parked the buffer against the wall and pulled a folded paper from my back pocket. A rough outline, ink smudged from too many midnight edits. I'd been carrying it around like a talisman, or maybe a shield. "You want me to read it?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Still feels like a first draft of who I wish I was." She nodded and handed me a pen she'd fished out of her pocket. "Just don't forget who you actually are while trying to rewrite it." Later, when I was cleaning the janitor closet, Dr. Howard King showed up. He didn't knock, just opened the door like he owned the place, which, academically speaking, He kinda did. He looked around at the shelves, the mop sink, the row of gloves half restocked from last week's shortage. Then his eyes landed on the draft, sitting on a flipped-over milk crate I used as a desk. "You thinking about backing out?" he asked. I didn't say anything, which honestly said everything. He picked up the paper, scanned the top line, and then looked me straight in the face. "Don't you dare," he said quietly. "I nominated you for a reason." I swallowed, throat dry. I just don't know if I can say it out loud the way it sounds in my head. You don't have to be perfect, Mercer. You just have to be honest. Let them meet you. He left without another word. That was his way. Come in like a gust, drop something heavy, and leave the door swinging. After my shift ended, I didn't go straight home. I sat in the employee lounge with a granola bar I didn't eat, listening to the vending machine whir and the early birds from day shift clock in. When I finally walked into my apartment, the light was still blinking on the answering machine I never checked. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door, kicked off my shoes, and sat down at the wobbly kitchen table. I opened my laptop and started typing. Some people inherit a legacy. Others build one on a floor that never stays clean for long. It came out of me like water from a pipe you didn't know was leaking. Line after line, word after word, until the page was half full and my hands were shaking. I hit save. Then I printed a copy. Not because I was ready, but because I needed to hold it. Feel it. Later, when Emily dropped by before her shift, I handed it to her without saying anything. She read it in silence. About halfway through, her hands started to tremble a little. At the end, she folded the pages slowly, like they were something delicate. "They're not ready for this," she said. She looked at me, really looked, and added, "But you are." I didn't know if she was right, but in that moment, I didn't feel like I was hiding in a janitor closet anymore. The dining room hadn't changed since I was 15. Same polished mahogany table, same arrangement of Waterford crystal glasses no one was allowed to actually use. Even the silence felt familiar. Polite, cold, and meant to outlast you if you dared break it. I sat 2 seats down from where I used to eat, back when I wore hand-me-down polos and tried to fold napkins into perfect triangles just to get through a Mercer dinner without comment. My mother passed the rolls like she always did, wordlessly, as if the act itself was the whole conversation. Dinner was roast chicken and asparagus. Neutral food, the kind that looked good in family photos, but didn't leave any scent behind afterward. Tanner had flown in from Durham. He wore a collared shirt the color of new dollar bills and kept glancing at his watch like he was timing his tolerance. I'd brought a printed copy of my speech, just in case. I told myself it was for editing, but really, I think I wanted someone to ask to read it. Some small piece of me still craved that absurd hope. The pages stuck out of my bag, just enough for my mother to notice. She reached over with a cloth napkin still in her hand and slid the top sheet out, squinting at the heading. Her eyes paused halfway down the page. "Emily Carter?" she asked, like she was tasting something she wasn't sure was ripe. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. She placed the sheet down on the table beside her wine glass, smoothed it with 2 fingers, and said, "You're not seriously bringing her to the ceremony. This isn't casual." My father looked up for the first time since Grace. "Is she the reason you work nights?" "No," I said. "The mortgage is." He hummed in that way he does when he wants to let you know the conversation is beneath him. "You know," Marianne said, still staring at the paper, "it's It's important that we present the family properly, especially when you're speaking. I'm not a political candidate, I replied. No, she said. But you're still a Mercer. That sentence landed like an old coat being draped over your shoulders, heavy, scratchy, the kind you thought you'd outgrown but apparently still fit into if someone insisted hard enough. Tanner hadn't said much the entire meal, but now he looked up from his plate and caught my eye. You already wrote the speech, Logan, he said quietly. Just don't expect them to hear it. I held his gaze. For the first time, I didn't see smugness or condescension, just tiredness. Maybe even recognition. Emily didn't come up again after that. Not by name, not directly. We talked about the weather, about traffic patterns near the university, about the price of flights and which suit my father planned to wear on the day of the ceremony. But no one asked me what I was going to say. No one asked why I was saying it. When dessert came, a lemon tart Marianne made from a recipe she never once credited to the magazine she clipped it from. I reached into my bag and folded the speech in half. Then again, and again. I slid it back in, half read, half allowed to exist. After dinner, I stepped outside while the others lingered over decaf and digested each other's small talk. The air was cooler than I expected, and the wind stirred the hedge I used to hide behind when I snuck out as a teenager. Some habits don't die. They just change form. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An email notification lit the screen. Final rehearsal, Monday at 10 a.m. Family members welcome to observe. I stared at the line. I imagined my mother sitting in the second row, her expression unreadable. My father checking his watch, Tanner watching without speaking. I imagined Emily, standing at the back, holding a cup of coffee too hot to drink, smiling the way she always did when I forgot how to breathe. I pocketed the phone and went back inside. No one asked where I'd been. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The screen glowed a pale blue in the otherwise dark classroom, and the cursor blinked like a silent metronome, steady, indifferent. I'd rewritten the first paragraph 7 times, deleted each version, rewrote again, deleted again. The coffee beside me had gone cold an hour ago. I drank it anyway. This room was usually full of discussion and debate, late-night brainstorming over midterms and market models. But tonight, it was just me and my doubts. Desks stacked, chairs pushed against the walls, and a whiteboard that still had half a quote from someone ambitious written in dry erase. Success is when preparation meets... And then it trailed off. Probably someone bumped the cap before they finished writing. I knew how that felt. I looked back at the blinking cursor. It dared me to try again. The speech was due in 48 hours. I had pages of notes, quotes, memories. But everything I typed felt filtered, like I was trying to translate a language I used to speak fluently, but no longer trusted. Most of my drafts read like press releases, others like apologies. A few just sounded like my father. I didn't want to say something that made people clap. I wanted to say something that made me feel less like a placeholder. The classroom door creaked open. Dr. Howard King stepped inside, holding a styrofoam cup and wearing a windbreaker that made him look more like a tired dad than the head of the MBA program. He didn't ask if I was busy, just walked over, glanced at the screen, and picked up one of the red ink-stained drafts beside me. "Is this a version for your father?" he asked, lifting one eyebrow. I didn't answer. He scanned a paragraph, frowned, then dropped it onto the pile. "Throw it out. I'm trying." "No, you're editing your courage out. That's different." He sat down across from me, His coffee smelled stronger than mine, and I was suddenly aware of how much my hands were shaking. "I nominated you for a reason," he said, softer now. "Don't make me regret it." I nodded, but said nothing. What could I say? That I didn't know which version of me deserved the microphone? Dr. King stood and stretched. "You've got something real to say, Logan. Stop hiding it behind your father's voice." Then he left. The silence that followed was heavier than before. I sat there long after the hallway lights timed out, leaving only the glow of my laptop and the metronome blink of the cursor. I wrote a line, deleted it, wrote another, deleted again. I hovered over my inbox, mouse arrow resting on a draft message to the dean's office. The subject line read, "Regarding commencement." I could feel the resignation in my fingertips. The soft pull toward letting it go. No big announcement, no drama. Just disappear. Quiet failure. I didn't click send. Instead, I sat back, closed my eyes, and tried to remember who I was before all the noise. Not the Mercer version, not the underachiever, not the janitor, not the disappointment, just me. When I opened my eyes, the screen was still there, waiting. I started typing. It didn't come out poetic or profound, but it came out honest. Some people inherit a legacy. Others build one on a floor that never stays clean for long. I kept writing, paragraph after paragraph. The words weren't smooth. Some lines scratched, some parts rambled, but none of it sounded like my father. That was the point. By the time I heard a soft knock on the glass, the sun had started to rise. Emily stood there, holding 2 coffees and wearing the kind of expression people use when they're scared something matters too much. I opened the door, handed her the freshly printed draft. I didn't say anything, didn't need to. She sat in the chair across from mine and started reading. About halfway through, she paused, wiped the corner of her eye with her thumb, and kept going. When she finished, she folded the pages in half, carefully. Then she looked at me and said, "This line. This is you. Don't erase yourself again." I looked down at the blinking cursor on the screen. This time, it didn't feel like a dare. It felt like a nod. Later, back in my apartment, I put the printed draft on the kitchen table. My hands were still trembling, but in a different way now. Not fear, not shame, anticipation. Then my phone buzzed. A new text from Tanner. "Dad's been invited to give opening remarks. You ready to follow that act?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the screen and let the silence fill me with something new. Not doubt, not dread, resolve. The restaurant was one of those places my family loved. A steakhouse with too much mahogany, an in-house pianist, and valet parking that made you feel like you were arriving for a Senate fundraiser. I hadn't eaten there since high school, and nothing had changed. Not the host in the burgundy vest. Not the smell of buttered rolls and old money. The waiter recognized Tanner the moment we stepped in. "Dr. Mercer," he beamed. "Still bourbon neat?" Tanner smiled, humble as ever. "That'd be great, thanks." The waiter turned to me. "And you are?" I didn't answer right away. Just smiled politely. "Water's fine." He nodded, already half turned away. We were seated at the long corner booth my parents always reserved for Mercer. Occasions. Marianne had picked out the wine ahead of time. The server uncorked it like he was conducting surgery. Charles sat at the center of the table, naturally. Marianne to his right, Tanner to his left. I slid into the end, where the lighting was dim enough to not show how tired my eyes had gotten lately. This was a Mercer tradition, the pre-graduation dinner. We did it for Tanner's high school ceremony, for his undergrad, and now for med school. I hadn't had one for mine. I told myself it was because I graduated early, or because they were busy, or because I didn't ask. Tanner chatted about residency offers. Marianne offered small corrections to the server's pronunciation of béarnaise. My father sipped wine like a judge in deliberation. Midway through the meal, Charles set down his glass with a quiet thud. "They've asked me to speak," he said, voice calm, precise. "I won't take long, just enough to make sure people remember who raised excellence." Tanner looked down. I looked at him. Marianne chimed in before either of us could reply. "Let's just all look presentable. No, surprises. The Mercers have enough attention as it is." I wanted to say something. Wanted to ask if the speech would include both sons. Wanted to ask if excellence came with an asterisk. But I didn't. The server returned with a small stack of printed programs. They'd arrived early from the university. Marianne flipped one open with her manicure clicking softly against the paper. "There it is," she said, tapping the page. "Logan's name, under the honorary section." I reached for mine, flipped to the center. There it was. Student speaker, Logan Mercer, printed just below honorary acknowledgement, Dr. Tanner Mercer. But mine was in smaller font, not bolded. The kind of formatting that says obligatory, not celebrated. I stared at it for longer than I needed to. It wasn't that they didn't see me. It was that they needed me small to feel tall. I folded the program down the middle, crisp and clean. A single crease right through my name. Then I slid it into my back pocket. Charles was already moving on. Something about the dean. Something about how he knew him from a committee once. I stopped listening. The conversation floated around me like a radio in another room, distant, too polished. When dessert came, something chocolate and stacked in layers, I pushed it around my plate. Tanner talked about a fellowship he might apply for in New York. Marianne asked if it had a good networking scene. Charles nodded like he already had a contact lined up. No one asked what I planned to say at the ceremony. No one asked why I was speaking. We stepped out into the parking lot just as dusk settled in. The valet handed Charles his keys first, of course. Tanner got a handshake. I got a "have a good night, sir," from someone who clearly didn't mean it. In my car, I pulled out the program again, ran my finger down the crease. My name was still there, small but present. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A photo from Emily. It was a screenshot of the university website. Commencement ceremony, student speaker, Logan Mercer, MBA. The caption read, "They chose you, Logan, not him." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I turned the key in the ignition and drove home without the radio on. I pressed my collar flat again, though I knew it would curl by the time we got to campus. The shirt had been washed too many times and ironed too few. My shoes, black, reliable, still bore the faint brown stain from a weeknight ER spill I hadn't been able to scrub out. I'd stopped trying. It was graduation morning. Emily and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the eggs between us gone mostly untouched. She'd put on her earrings, the small silver hoops that always made her look like she knew something important. I hadn't said much. Neither had she. But she poured the coffee, and I poured it back. And that counted for something. "You don't have to prove anything," she said quietly, after a long stretch of fork tapping on ceramic. I looked at her, my tie draped untied around my neck like a noose waiting for ceremony. "That's the problem," I said. "I do. to myself. She reached across the table and tightened my tie in one motion. It wasn't perfect, but it was tighter than I'd done it. The knot sat a little high, a little uneven, exactly like me. The drive to campus was short and silent. I didn't turn on the radio. The sun hadn't fully climbed yet, and Knoxville still held the cool hush of early morning. There were kids in gowns crossing the street, clumps of parents taking pictures in front of banners. A kind of happiness hung in the air, the bright, shiny kind you knew wouldn't last, but still wanted to touch. The ceremony was being held in the university's main auditorium. Brick walls, columns, white tent flapping gently at the entrance. It looked like someone had borrowed pride from another decade and draped it over this one. Dean Caldwell was waiting near the stairs. He wasn't wearing his usual suit jacket, just a crisp shirt and a velvet stole that looked heavier than it needed to be. "Mr. Mercer," he greeted, holding out a firm hand. "You've earned this, Mike. Speak like it belongs to you." I nodded, but didn't trust myself to say thank you without my voice cracking. Inside, they handed me my lanyard, my robe, and a program printed on thick paper. My name was in bold, top line, centered. They'd spelled it right. Emily squeezed my hand once, briefly. "Go get in line," she said. "I'll find my seat." I wanted to walk her in myself, wanted to see her name taped to the seat next to mine, front row, where the other families would be. But I knew how these things worked. 20 minutes later, standing backstage, I scanned the seating chart printed for faculty and families. Reserved rows marked with last names and titles. Dr. Tanner Mercer, Charles and Marianne Mercer. There was no Emily Carter. I checked again, then once more. Nothing. I found her behind the second section, standing near the wall with her coffee and a kind smile she wore like armor. She caught my eye, shrugged. "It's fine," her lips mouthed. And in that moment, I felt invisible again, except to the one person the list had refused to acknowledge. They hadn't left her off by accident, not at a Mercer-affiliated event, not when everyone else had been accounted for, down to second cousins and long-lost prep school friends. Erasure is a kind of power. A quiet one, but still sharp. I looked down at the speech in my hand, folded once, carefully like it mattered. The words inside weren't flawless, but they were mine. I slid it into the inside pocket of my robe, just over my heart. Then I walked toward the backstage entrance, where the light was dim and the hallway narrowed, like the space between hesitation and action. A figure stepped out from the shadows. Navy suit, silver tie, eyes that always read like courtrooms. "Don't embarrass us, son." My father didn't smile, didn't pat my shoulder, just left the words hanging there like an accusation already filed. I didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't blink. I just stepped past him, toward the stage. The auditorium lights had been dimmed just enough to make the banners glow, red and gold draped across the stage like they meant something. The music started up again, string instruments warbling a hopeful melody while graduates filed across the stage, name after name called in deliberate cadence. Each one met with polite applause. Then came Tanner Mercer. The room erupted. I mean, it shook. Chairs creaked, phones flashed. Someone near the front whistled like we were at a basketball game. Tanner lifted a hand in acknowledgement, half bow, half bless you, before shaking the dean's hand and sliding into his seat 2 rows ahead of me. My hands were damp, not from nerves exactly, not anymore. More like from the weight of holding everything in for so long, expectation, disappointment, silence. My back ached in that dull, persistent way that comes from nights spent standing on hard tile floors. The robe felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than fabric. Dean Caldwell stepped to the mic. The music faded. The crowd quieted again. He adjusted the microphone slightly, looked across the graduates, then down at a note card he clearly didn't need. "Our next speaker," he began, "is a student who worked nights, studied days, and redefined what honor looks like." He looked up, looked directly at me. "Logan Mercer." My name didn't come with cheers. Not yet. A smattering of polite applause rose, hesitant, then gained a bit of momentum as people tried to place the name. I stood, slow and steady, hands pressed to the sides of the gown to keep them from trembling. The speech sat in the inside pocket just above my chest. I began to move toward the stage. And then I heard the chair scrape. The sound was subtle but jarring, wood against polished floor. Charles Mercer rose from his seat in the front row. He didn't ask permission. He didn't look to the dean or anyone else. He simply stepped forward, one hand raised slightly, the other already reaching toward the microphone. "Excuse me," he said, voice sharp enough to pierce the quiet. "Before this begins," I stopped mid-step, not from fear, from recognition, because I knew this moment. I'd lived versions of it before, birthday parties, family interviews, church fundraisers. He spoke first so I wouldn't have to, or couldn't. This had always been the battle. He spoke so I disappeared. Dean Caldwell didn't move. Not yet. His face didn't flinch, but his fingers tapped once on the podium edge. A tick I'd learned meant he was thinking. Hard. My father gripped the mic with the kind of ease you don't earn, you inherit it. His posture flawless, tie perfect, jaw tight enough to crack granite. "You're celebrating a failure," he said. 3 words. Quiet. Clear. The room didn't gasp. It exhaled. A collective shift of energy, as if no one knew exactly what they were witnessing. But everyone knew it wasn't planned. He looked out over the crowd, not at me. This is a boy who turned his back on tradition, who chose janitor shifts over internships, a low-tier school over legacy. He scrubbed floors instead of standing beside future leaders. A few people coughed. A phone buzzed somewhere in the back. I stood there, 6 steps from the podium, still frozen. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I suddenly knew it too well. Dean Caldwell's hand lifted, slow, controlled, a signal he might intervene, but not yet. And I realized something. This wasn't about me failing. It was about me refusing to be quiet. He was trying to take the stage the way he always had, by assuming it belonged to him. But this time, I had a name on the program. This time the microphone had been given to me. My foot shifted forward, 1 step closer. The robe swayed around my ankles. Charles wasn't done. He thinks this struggle makes him noble, that by rejecting what we built, he somehow becomes more authentic. He finally turned to me. "But the truth is, you're here today because someone still pulled strings to let you stand on that stage. You didn't earn that mic. You're borrowing it." Dean Caldwell took a breath. Then I took another step forward, and another. The silence was louder than anything I'd ever heard. Cameras clicked, programs rustled, a baby whimpered in the back. But mostly there was stillness. A waiting. I reached the edge of the podium. My father hadn't moved. Dean Caldwell placed a hand gently on the other side of the microphone. Just 2 fingers. Charles looked down at them, and then, slowly, let go. No words, just release. I didn't look at him, didn't need to. I looked at the podium. The thing I had walked toward for what felt like years. The place where Mercer boys gave speeches about law school and internships and summer in Geneva. The place I had never been allowed to stand. I stepped behind it. I looked at the audience. Then I looked to the back of the room. Where Emily stood, no name tag, no family row, but smiling, just for me. You're celebrating a failure. His voice rang louder than the applause that had just finished dying. It didn't echo, didn't tremble. It landed flat and sharp, like the snap of a gavel in a courtroom. He didn't need volume, just clarity. My father stood at the microphone, shoulders squared, jaws set. The auditorium stilled in a way no one plans for. This wasn't part of the program, but no one moved. Not yet. I stood behind him, 6 steps back. My name had just been called, the student speaker. That was supposed to be my moment. But of course, Charles Mercer had his own sense of timing and his own sense of ownership. Phones were already lifted. I saw 2 in the front row filming. A woman near the center lowered her program and tilted her head. Emily stood at the back, frozen, lips slightly parted, coffee still in hand. My father didn't look at me. He looked at them. "This young man," he said, gesturing toward me without turning around, chose to scrub hospital floors instead of standing beside leaders. He walked away from the Mercer legacy, from real opportunity, from family investment. He calls it independence. A few people shifted in their seats. One person coughed. I could feel the air thicken. He chose a path that made him feel noble, maybe even heroic. My father went on. But nobility isn't rejection, and it certainly isn't bitterness dressed up as authenticity. Dean Caldwell moved then, calm, measured. He approached the podium and stopped just to the side. "Mr. Mercer," he said, voice even but firm. "That's enough." My father turned toward him slightly. "I believe context is important, Dean, especially when a family name is involved." "I agree," Caldwell replied. "But this stage belongs to the student, and the moment belongs to the audience." He turned to me. I didn't move yet, not because I was afraid, but because I was choosing not to react the way I had my entire life, by retreating. Dean Caldwell placed one hand gently on the mic, steady but not forceful. He looked at me, his eyes clear. "Logan," he said, "would you like to continue?" I stepped forward. It wasn't dramatic. My feet didn't stomp, my breath didn't catch, my heart didn't race. I just moved, because I was done waiting for permission. My father stepped aside, almost mechanically. He didn't meet my eyes. He didn't have to. The message had already been delivered. But for once, it didn't land where he thought it would. I wasn't angry. I was still. And in that stillness was something far more unsettling than rage. Peace. The kind of peace that arrives not when the noise stops, but when you no longer care who's listening. Dean let go of the mic. I took it, not shaking, not scared. It was warm from my father's hands. But that heat didn't belong to him anymore. I looked out across the room. They were watching, all of them. Not because I'd earned their awe, not because I wore the right suit or carried the right name, but because something had just shifted, and they knew it. Maybe they didn't know why yet, but they could feel it. Emily gave a small nod from the back, just enough to reach me, just enough to say, "I see you." I adjusted the mic, breathed in, and began. They called me a failure at my graduation. The words came out softer than I expected, not bitter, not defensive, just true. I saw the ripple in the crowd, the tilt of heads, the straightening of spines. I let the silence hang. Then I added, "But here's what they never understood. The first row leaned in. Dean Caldwell didn't leave the stage. He stood to my left, just slightly behind, a quiet anchor in case the air got too thin up here. I was aware of his presence, but not distracted by it. I was aware of everything now, the breath in my chest, the warmth of the mic, the way the auditorium seemed to pulse with waiting. My parents sat apart, not just physically, though they were 3 chairs away from each other, but in posture, in energy. My father's arms were folded, lips tight, eyes fixed not on me but above me, as if looking directly might validate something he couldn't tolerate. My mother's hands rested on her lap, fingers laced together like she was keeping them from floating away. I unfolded the paper, not to read it, just to look at it one more time. Then I folded it again, clean, precise, and slipped it into my pocket, over the heart. This wasn't going to be that speech. This wasn't going to be anyone's speech but mine. I stepped closer to the mic. For a moment, I let the silence settle again, let the room exhale. Then I spoke. "Success isn't clean," I said. No echo. No amplification needed. It's not always printed on a degree or handed to you by someone with a firm handshake and the right connections. A pause. Sometimes it comes after your hands bleed and your name's left off the guest list. I heard a murmur, low but present. I kept going. My name wasn't on the fridge calendar. My name wasn't announced with applause. My name was on a badge clipped to a shirt that smelled like disinfectant. My name was on night shift rosters, next to floors that didn't stay clean for long. I looked out, not at my family, but at the rows of students. Caps tilted, gowns wrinkled, some still gripping programs like they might forget what today was supposed to mean. "If they call you a failure," I said, "let them." That got a few eyes to lift. I took a breath and said it again, slower. "If they call you a failure, let them. It only means you stopped performing for them." This time, it landed. There was a stillness after that. Not uncomfortable, not strained. Just full. Then someone clapped. One hand, then 2, then more. And soon it wasn't polite. It was whole. A standing ovation. Not from my father, not from the Rao-marked Mercer, but from peers, professors, strangers, people who had no investment in my story but still chose to rise with it. I didn't bow, I didn't smile, I just let it happen. Dean Caldwell stepped forward, shook my hand quietly. "That," he said under his breath, "was yours alone." When the applause softened into the shuffle of next names, I stepped off the stage, down the steps, back into the crowd. The robe felt different now, still heavy, but not in the same way. Outside, the sun had pushed past the morning haze. Students were taking photos, hugging parents, adjusting caps. I saw Emily near the edge of the walkway, standing slightly apart from the families. She had a bag over one shoulder and a soft smile tucked under her eyes. "They saw you," she said when I reached her. I nodded. "Yeah." Then I looked back. Charles was gone. No surprise. But Marianne lingered. She hadn't moved from her seat. Not clapping, not leaving. Just sitting. Watching the stage as if something might still be said. I didn't wave. But I didn't look away either. My hand brushed against the pocket of my robe. The speech was still there. Never needed, but always carried. Beneath the old oaks lining the east side of campus, people had started to gather for what someone called one last shot. The group photo, all the families, all the graduates. Gowns slightly wrinkled, caps crooked from hugs and heat, proud parents pulling their children close in the name of tradition. The Mercers were already in place. Tanner stood in the middle, one arm slung around our cousin Jenna, the other resting lightly on my mother's shoulder. My father stood behind them, posture rigid, hand in pocket, ready for the click. Someone adjusted his tie. He allowed it. I walked past them without pausing. Emily's hand was in mine. Warm, steady. She didn't say anything, and I didn't look back. The air smelled like sun-warmed grass and something vaguely like barbecue coming from a nearby fraternity house. A few kids were tossing a football in the background, shouting with the kind of joy that comes from having nothing more to prove. I stopped near the edge of the lawn, where a folding table held a pile of extra programs and a simple wooden photo frame. The frame leaned against a stack of water bottles, its back flap broken, the glass removed. It was empty, except for the faint reflection of me standing in front of it. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. Marianne appeared beside me. I hadn't heard her footsteps. Her voice was softer than usual. Your father didn't mean to humiliate you. I didn't look at her. But he meant to make me disappear, I said. Same thing. She flinched a little, almost imperceptibly, the way people do when truth lands harder than they expected. He thought he was protecting what we've built, she said, still watching the crowd, not me. I stopped needing protection the moment I stopped pretending I belonged in the picture. We stood there in silence, watching flashes go off in bursts as families laughed and posed. You could almost believe everything in the photo was whole. But I knew better. Some things looked complete only because the cracks didn't show until years later. I hope you're proud of yourself, she said finally. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't a condemnation either. Just a line she could still control. I am, I replied. Not because I stood on a stage, but because I finally stopped shrinking to fit someone else's frame. She didn't answer. Emily touched my arm gently, signaling without words. I turned toward her. Our car was parked down the hill just past the fountain where kids were now lining up in their gowns for selfies. As we walked, I felt the weight lift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough to breathe a little deeper. Emily opened the passenger door. On the seat sat a small, cream-colored envelope. I looked at her. It's not fancy, she said, shrugging. I opened it. Inside was a card, simple lettering. You're invited to something real. I ran my thumb over the ink, the corner of the card bending slightly with pressure. No gold embossing, no RSVP code, no pretense, just presence. I buckled in. Emily started the car. We drove past the main quad, past the folding tables and clusters of caps and gowns, past the smiling strangers with perfect posture. And then we turned away, toward something else, toward something that didn't need a photo to prove it happened. There was no DJ, no champagne, just Nurse Amanda's casserole, something cheesy with too much paprika, and Dr. King standing in the middle of the hospital break room, holding a soda can like it was a fine glass of Pinot. The cake sat on the metal cart where we usually park trauma kits. A sheet cake, store-bought, slightly uneven frosting. But the words piped in, blue icing stopped me cold. We see you, Logan. No exclamation point, no decoration. Just that. Around it were a dozen faces I'd seen at 3 a.m., all looking brighter than I'd ever known them. Environmental staff, nurses, a respiratory tech who once held a baby's hand through a 40-minute seizure. People who didn't need programs or spotlights to prove their worth. I stood in the doorway, not moving for a second. Then Amanda stepped forward, handing me a paper plate with a crooked slice of cake already served. You thought you were just cleaning the ER, she said, voice gruff with affection. But you cleared the path too. I didn't know what to say. So I took the cake. Dr. King raised his soda, his tie slightly askew, like it always got when he was off the clock. "I remember the first time I saw you," he said, half asleep, wiping a floor while reciting balance sheet terms under your breath. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a thin envelope. "I kept this," he said. "Your original draft, the one with the notes in the margin and the ink smudges." I took it, held it like a fragile thing. "I figured," he continued, "you might want to see where you started. Sometimes we forget." Emily was leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, smiling in that way she did when she wasn't trying to interrupt a moment. She stepped forward, holding something behind her back. "Okay," she said, drawing out the word like she was nervous. "You gave them a speech. I figured it's time someone gave you something back." She pulled out a small wooden plaque. Simple brass plate, mounted on a dark finish. It read, "Logan Mercer, MBA Real Work Division." I blinked, then laughed. It came from the gut, surprised, free. "You're kidding." She shook her head. "I had it made last week. Thought you might need a desk nameplate for all those jobs you're not technically hired for." The others laughed. Amanda clapped me on the back. Dr. King gave a slow nod of approval. I looked down at the plaque again. The Mercer name used to make me shrink. Used to weigh like wet fabric after a storm, sticking to my back, cold, impossible to peel away. But now I was the one shaping what it meant. I walked to the center of the room, raised my soda can the way I'd seen Charles raise his whiskey 100 times, firm, effortless, like it meant something just to lift your hand and be heard. "To the ones who stayed," I said, not loud, but clear. They raised their cups, their plates, their eyebrows, and answered with a collective warmth I hadn't known I needed. We stood like that for a moment, just standing, not proving, not posing, just present. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Tanner. "We should talk soon." I slid the phone back without replying. Not yet. Some conversations don't need to be rushed, especially when, for the first time, the one in front of you is exactly the one you chose. It was Saturday morning, the kind where the sunlight is too gentle to believe in, and the city moves half a breath slower. I sat on a bench just outside the hospital, paper cup of coffee between my hands, already cold. The asphalt still held last night's dew, and every few minutes, someone in scrubs passed by without noticing me. I like that. The anonymity of the bench. Neutral ground, not Mercer property, not university assigned, just space no one tried to own. I didn't hear Tanner walk up, but I felt it. The shift in air, the way only family can rearrange a silence without saying anything. He sat beside me without a word. No handshake, no grand gesture. Just lowered himself onto the bench like he'd been meaning to all week. He wasn't in scrubs. No name badge, no blazer. Just a simple gray shirt and jeans that made him look younger, smaller, normal. For a long moment, we sat without speaking. The kind of quiet that would have made us uncomfortable 10 years ago. Now it just felt necessary. "You burned the house down last week," Tanner finally said, voice low, metaphorically. I sipped my cold coffee. Remember, I just refused to live in a room without light anymore. He chuckled, short, real. "That speech," he said. "It's circling LinkedIn now. Someone posted a clip. They cut Dad out completely." I didn't respond. "I watched it twice," he added. I looked over. "Twice? Okay. 3 times." We both smiled, barely. "I wasn't happy," he said after a pause. being their hero, just too scared to stop playing the role. I studied him, this man who had always walked a step ahead of me at Mercer events, who got the better seat, the bigger slice, the louder applause, who had been handed the baton before I even knew there was a race. Funny, I said. I spent half my life trying to catch up. You were probably hoping I'd slow down. He nodded. Probably. I looked down at my hands. Dad's getting heat, Tanner said. I blinked. From who? Partners, alumni board, donors. Word got out about what he did at the ceremony. The clips making rounds, not flattering ones. I waited for the satisfaction. It didn't come. Not because it wasn't deserved, but because I didn't need it. That's not on you? Tanner said quickly, as if trying to absolve me of something I wasn't carrying. I know. I leaned back, let my shoulder touch the metal rail behind us. I thought I'd feel vindicated, I admitted. But instead I feel lighter. I nodded, like I finally put down something I wasn't supposed to carry in the first place. Another pause. Tanner ran a hand through his hair. He wants to talk? I turned. Dad? He nodded. If you're willing. I stared out at the parking lot. A nurse wheeled a patient past us, IV stand glinting in the sun. The world kept turning, even with decades between brothers unfolding like Sunday newspapers between us. I don't want an apology, I said. I know. I don't need his approval. I figured. I looked at him, but I might want a conversation. Tanner stood, stretched, like the moment had settled enough. He offered a small smile. You know where to find him. I stood too. But this time, I said, brushing coffee from my jeans, I bring my own seat to the table. He nodded. We didn't hug. That wasn't us. But we didn't need to. We had the bench. And silence that finally meant something. The kitchen was spotless. The same fruit bowl sat in the center of the table, filled with plastic lemons that had never ripened. The light from the window still hit the counter at a sharp angle, same as it had when I was 12 and learning that silence in this house meant more than words ever did. But now I knew how to fill it. Charles sat at the head of the table. No tie, no blazer, just a pressed shirt, sleeves rolled once, as if to say, this isn't court. But everything else about him, the posture, the folded hands, the way he looked at me without blinking, was still Mercer. Marianne stood in the hallway, arms crossed, not hovering, just present. I pulled out the chair I used to sit in. The wood didn't creak. It had always been solid, unlike me. I didn't think you'd come, my father said. I met his gaze. I didn't think you'd ask. That was all the acknowledgement we allowed. He reached into a folder beside him and pulled out an envelope. Thick paper, no label. He slid it across the table, his fingers lingering on it for a moment before releasing. It's a donation, he said. Personal. You can start something under the Mercer name. Something that means something. I didn't touch it. We sat there. The clock on the microwave ticked. I'm not trying to rewrite what happened, he said. That can't be undone. But I'm not blind either. People are talking. I nodded. They should be. He leaned back slightly. Not defensive, just tired. Your speech made people uncomfortable. Truth usually does. He studied me for a long moment. You sounded like a man who doesn't need anyone. I don't need validation. He nodded once. That's clear. But that doesn't mean I don't value connection, I added. I just want it on my terms. He glanced at the envelope, then back at me. That's fair. I finally reached out and took it. Not to accept it, but to hold it. Feel its weight. It was heavier than I expected. I already started something, I said quietly, with people who saw me before I had a title. He didn't argue, didn't smile either, but he looked still. Like maybe for the first time, he understood I wasn't trying to fight him. I was just done surrendering. Marianne stepped into the kitchen, poured coffee without speaking, and placed a cup in front of each of us. She didn't sit, but she stayed. "I saw the video," she said, her voice softer than usual. I looked up. "You didn't stutter," she added, then walked back into the hallway. My father cleared his throat. "If you invite us to that ceremony next year, the scholarship one, we'll show up." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just nodded once. We sat there a few minutes longer, not talking, not needing to. When I stood to leave, I tucked the envelope into my bag. But I didn't take anything else. On the way out, I passed the wall of family photos. Same arrangement, same golden lighting, same faces. In the center hung the Mercer family portrait. Charles in his navy suit, Marianne in pearls, Tanner standing tall in his white coat. I paused. Then I kept walking. I didn't remove it, didn't add to it. Some frames aren't meant to be filled, not because you don't belong, but because you've learned to build your own. The nameplate was simple. No gold trim, no dramatic serif font. Just clean, engraved letters against brushed steel, mounted on a small section of the hospital scholarship wall. The Mercer Fund for Working Students. It caught the light as I stepped closer, and for a second, I didn't recognize it. Not because of the name, but because of what stood behind it. Not legacy, not bloodline, but intention. The ceremony was small. Maybe 20 people. Folding chairs on a quiet Saturday morning. No stage, just a podium pushed in front of a window that let the late spring sun spill across the linoleum floor. Emily sat in the front row, a reusable coffee cup in her hands, her legs crossed and her eyes steady on me. There was pride there, but not the kind that demanded to be seen. Just presence. The quiet, unshakable kind. Amanda stood at the podium first. Her nurse's badge caught the light, and she squinted at her own handwriting on the note card as if to soften the formality of the moment. "When Logan started here," she said, "he was just another night shift janitor. But if you paid attention, you saw it. How he moved, how he listened, how he carried weight that didn't belong to him." She looked over at me. He cleaned more than the floor. He cleared space for all of us. I stood when she finished, heart beating in a rhythm I'd come to recognize, not fear, but something close to reverence. Not for the moment, but for everything that had led to it. I stepped up, no paper this time, just breath and memory. "This name," I began, glancing toward the plaque, "used to make me feel invisible." Pause. When you're born into a legacy, sometimes all you inherit is the echo, the pressure to fit a shape someone else traced for you. Another pause. I spent a long time resenting that. The Mercer name, what it meant, what it didn't. I wore it like something borrowed, something too tight across the chest. I scanned the small crowd, colleagues, students, donors who weren't sure what to expect. But now, I continued, this name funds futures I never got handed. Futures built by hands that clock in late and study later, by people who know what real work looks like. I told them about the janitor closet, about the folded speech, about the silence that tried to rewrite me, and the voice I found in spite of it. And then I stepped back. There was applause, gentle, earnest. No standing ovation, just enough. Afterward, people came up one by one. A new scholarship recipient shook my hand with both of hers. Dr. King patted my shoulder and said nothing. Amanda handed me a container of banana bread with a post-it that said, "Breakfast tomorrow." Then Marianne appeared. She wore a dark blue blazer and held a small black box in her palm, the kind used for jewelry or pins. Her expression was neutral. "I thought you should have this," she said, and placed it in my hand. Inside was a silver tie clip, simple, elegant. On the underside, engraved initials, LM. "Your grandfather's," she said. I nodded, closing the box softly. "Thank you." She gave a small nod, turned, and walked away. I didn't wear it, but I didn't forget it either. Some things aren't meant to be worn again, but remembered, redefined. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you build when no one claps yet. Emily waited for me near the doorway, arms folded, smile tugging at the edge of her mouth. "So," she said, drawing out the word. "Family dinner next week?" I raised an eyebrow. "Our place?" She nodded. "Only if I cook," I said. "Deal." We walked out together. The plaque behind us stayed exactly where it was, quiet, gleaming, real. The kitchen smells like rosemary and garlic. Emily's humming something faint near the stove, stirring with one hand and balancing her phone on her shoulder while trying to confirm if Dr. King still prefers sparkling or flat. The tables mismatched, one leg shorter, propped up with an old coaster. The chairs squeak every time someone shifts. One of them has a cracked armrest we keep meaning to fix. It's perfect. There's no centerpiece, no polished silverware, just plates we like and napkins folded the wrong way. Emily's handwriting is on the whiteboard by the fridge. Dinner at 6. Bring stories, not sides. Guests arrive slowly. Nurse Amanda brings a lemon tart and a bottle of wine with the label half torn. She walks in like she's been here before, because she has. On long nights, on birthdays when family didn't show up, on Tuesday evenings when silence needed company. Dr. King arrives next, carrying a stack of books he says are only for students with real desks. He hands me one, winks, and says, "For your next chapter." Pun intended. Then, surprisingly, but maybe not, Tanner walks in. No fanfare, no suit, just him. He's holding a paper bag and a 6-pack of soda. When I open the door, he says, "I wasn't sure if this was invite only." I shrug. It's not even RSVP. He smiles, small and real. We gather around the table. There's laughter, small talk, and more forks than matching plates. Someone spills water, and no one rushes to clean it. Emily burns the edge of the casserole. No one cares. When it's time for a toast, Emily nudges me with her elbow. I look around at the woman who believed before I did, the professor who told me to speak louder, the nurse who saw more than I ever said, the brother who finally sat without the Mercer mask. I raise my glass. To people who stayed, even when you couldn't see them, I say, and to finding new frames when the old ones never fit. Amanda clinks her fork on her glass. Dr. King raises his soda. Tanner doesn't toast, but he watches, and he nods. Later, as the noise softens into background hums and the tart is nearly gone, Tanner quietly reaches into his bag. He pulls out a small black frame, sets it on the table without a word. In it, a photo of me at commencement, standing behind the mic, hand mid-gesture, mouth open. That moment, just before I said anything, when silence was still mine to shape. Someone had printed it. I looked down at it for a long time. I never made it into the Mercer family photo that day. But this one has my name on it. And I didn't have to earn it. As the evening winds down, chairs scoot back, glasses empty, laughter gives way to comfort. I step outside as the sky bleeds gold across the back deck. The air is cooler now, the kind that tells you seasons are changing. I lean against the railing. The wood creaks a little, and I whisper, mostly to myself, maybe to no one at all. Failure? I smile. You'll need a better word. I used to think legacy meant something fixed, something printed in black ink, passed down through titles, expectations, and perfectly ironed dinner shirts. But I was wrong. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you define when no one's clapping, when no one's even looking. I don't know exactly when the shift happened. Maybe it was when I folded my speech one last time, or when Emily whispered, "They saw you." Maybe it was quieter than that, like the moment I stepped off a stage and realized I hadn't needed applause to know I was enough. My father and I never had a breakthrough. No grand apology, no hug. But sometimes the loudest things are said and what we don't argue about anymore. He didn't speak at the next ceremony. He didn't need to. These days, I live in a house with mismatched chairs and a crooked nameplate that makes people smile when they read it. I work with people who've never seen a Mercer Gala but know how to keep a patient breathing during a storm. And some nights, over leftover casserole and laughter, I feel something better than closure, continuity. We didn't rebuild the old table. We made a new one. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not returning to what broke you, but creating something that never will. True family isn't always made by blood. It's made by presence. In a world that values appearances, it's easy to chase validation from the loudest voices. But sometimes, the most important thing you can do is build a life with the quiet people who simply show up. Legacy is not what you're given. It's what you create when you stop asking for permission. And forgiveness doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's enough to set down the weight, walk forward, and bring your own chair to the table. If this story brought you comfort or reminded you of your own journey, we invite you to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories that speak to the heart. Explore our other tales. You might find one that feels like home.